Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melinda Bachini, and I'm the Director of Advocacy with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. And it's my pleasure to be here and a privilege to speak about the patient perspective to cancer care. I'm from Billings, Montana. I'm a wife and a mother to 6 beautiful children. And it was December 1st, 2009, when I first received that phone call that changed my life forever. I remember that day very well. My children had just left for school. My husband had just left for work, and I had was just about to jump in the shower when my phone rang. It was my gastroenterologist on the other end of the line, and she said those words that you never want to hear. And I remember her telling me she was so sorry. It wasn't on her radar, but I have cancer. And I remember telling her that I was so sorry it wasn't on my radar either. And then I didn't hear a word she said after that. My mind just kind of went blank as she talked on. I called my husband, he came home, we had a good cry, and then he had to call my doctor back and get all the information that I couldn't remember about what she said. She had told us that it was most likely cholangiocarcinoma. My husband and I were both like, cholangio what? We had never heard of it before. We were told it was a rare bile duct cancer, usually diagnosed in late stages. Surgery is the only potential for a cure. There's no proven chemotherapy regimen. And even if you're fortunate enough to have surgery, the reoccurrence rate is quite high. One of the first major decisions we had to make was to find a surgeon. Who would we choose and where would we go? We did get a second opinion from Mayo Clinic, but for personal reasons, I chose to stay home and have my surgery done here in Billings, Montana by a local surgeon. It took about 6 hours, 5 units of blood, and I had about 2/3 of my liver removed. And they removed about a 9 by 13 centimeter tumor from me, and I was told that there was clean margins. Unfortunately, 3 months later, it came back. It was that time when I saw on paper that I was labeled a stage 4 terminal cancer patient. I knew that I needed to find a new plan because what was out there wasn't going to cure me. I looked for clinical trials, and my oncologist was very aggressive. We did find a clinical trial, but unfortunately at that time, my insurance that I had would not cover the standard of care treatments that went into that clinical trial. So I did not want to put my family in financial stress, so I chose not to go with the clinical trial, and we went ahead and started the standard of care treatment of chemotherapy, which I knew was only palliative treatment and wasn't going to cure me. So chemo began with a weekly chemo cocktail of gemcitabine and cisplatin, followed with a side of steroids, antiemetics, and Benadryl, and 4 days of Neupogen shots. This lasted for about 6 months until the toxicity set in with ringing in my ears, hearing loss, neuropathy in my hands and feet, and a little bonus of steroid psychosis. The pictures show me 6 months before chemo started and 6 months after chemo, just to show the physical impact it has on your appearance. The next major decision I had to make was quality versus quantity. I spent the next year doing different chemo combinations with not a lot of success, no success at all actually. And I knew it wasn't going to cure me, and my quality of life was quite poor. I didn't want to give up. I especially didn't want my children to think I was giving up or that they weren't worth it for me to continue on. But I really wanted to spend what time I had left with my children being able to function. So we did stop chemo, and I had made that decision and I was at peace with it. Miraculously, I stumbled upon a clinical trial at the National Institute of Health. It was called the GI TIL trial at the time. And in March of 2012, my husband and I went out for the initial consultation. 2 weeks later, we were out there for surgery, and they removed 4 tumors from my right lung. I returned in a month and received cell-depleting chemo. And followed by that, I received 42.6 billion T cells. I was away from my family for about a month, and then I recovered enough to go home. The results of that first treatment was I was the 9th person to enter into the trial, the first with cholangiocarcinoma, and the first to have a response. I had an overall shrinkage of almost 30%, and for 18 months I had no other treatment, and I enjoyed a great quality of life. But unfortunately, the cancer started growing again. But in that 18-month time frame, they were able to discover that one of my T cells was reactive to one of the mutations in my cancer. They wanted to retreat me with this T cell treatment, and I just remember the excitement in the air when Dr. Rosenberg told me about it. So I headed back for the beginning of round 2. After my second T cell treatment of 127 billion specific T cells that were targeting this mutation. The scans show 6 months after that treatment, the decrease in my tumor size of the tumors that were in my lungs, and the chart shows the increase and decrease of the tumors from both the T cell treatment number 1 and T cell treatment number 2. So the results from the second TIL treatment, I had about 50 to 60% shrinkage in all my tumors. I had 3 years of great quality of life with no other treatments, just my immune cells keeping the cancer at bay. The results of this study was published in the Science Journal, and the New York Times did an article. And I remember as the stories went around the world, that first week I received hundreds of phone calls from patients all over the world. And that was when my love for patient advocacy was born. I realized at the time that patients just wanted hope. They just needed to know that there was hope. They didn't need to know that the same exact treatment would work for them. They just needed to know that there was a possibility. In January of 2016, we saw our first glimpse of growth in the tumors in my lungs. It wasn't fast, so we chose to monitor it throughout the year. And then at the end of September, or in September of 2016, Dr. Rosenberg decided to be proactive with a thoracotomy, removing the remaining tumors in my right lung. They resequenced and did research on these tumors. The research showed that the mutation-reactive T cells were still present, and so was the same mutation in my tumors. But this time, the tumors were infiltrated with macrophages that expressed high levels of PD-L1. So I received my first dose of pembrolizumab to target that PD-L1 protein. And after 2 doses of pembrolizumab, I had extreme shrinkage in what was left of my tumors, over 50%. So Dr. Rosenberg chose to treat me with only 8 doses of pembrolizumab, and that was almost 4 years ago. So in the last 4 years, I've had no other treatments. Technically, I'm not labeled, no evidence of disease or in remission. We keep an eye on it. There's a couple spots in my left lung that haven't moved in 4 years, and we assume that are just scar tissue, and I'm happy with that. Because I've had such good results with this clinical trial, I felt really strongly about finding a way to pay it forward. I started volunteering with the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation about 10 years ago. I came on as a patient advocate and worked on the discussion board, helping patients and caregivers navigate all the decisions that go along with having this cancer. I also serve as a patient advocate for the NCI Hepatobiliary Task Force, for ECOG-ACRIN, and for the NCI Council of Research Advocates. So now it brings me to the patient perspective survey. This survey was born out of a conversation with myself, the president of the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation, and 2 surgeons trying to better understand decisions made in caring for patients, particularly cholangiocarcinoma and pancreatic patients. You've heard my perspective when it comes to social support and the strength and guidance I received from my family. You heard about my decisions to have surgery, a total of 5 to be exact, the non-surgical therapies I tried with chemotherapy and the challenges that came with them. And finally, my decision to try a clinical trial, which has ultimately prolonged my life. I think you will see that some of the decisions I made throughout my journey reflect some of the patients' wishes in this survey. Our aim was the survey was to better understand the beliefs, wishes, and perspectives of pancreatic and cholangiocarcinoma patients when it comes to their cancer care. We distributed a 46 question survey through the PanCan and CCF networks, and over 1,000 surveys were completed. 2/3 were pancreatic and 1/3 were from cholangiocarcinoma patients. We can see when it comes to social support for us patients, it comes in several different ways. Similar to me, the majority relied on family and friends for their main support network. Interestingly, of the patients who were married, only 50% or so said being married affected their decisions when it came to treatment options. And just slightly more than 50% said having children affected their decision-making when it came to treatment options. While support networks are an important part of the patient journey, over 50% of patients say it doesn't affect their treatment decisions. I relied on my spouse and children to help navigate my decisions, but when it came down to it, the final choice was mine to make. Now moving on to the patient perspective of surgery. Over 2/3 of our patients had at least 1 surgery, as I well understand having a total of 5 surgeries and knowing I would definitely do it again if it were necessary for my treatment plan. It's important for you all to know that almost 30% of patients would be willing to undergo surgery, even if the risk of complications were high, including death. I know I was willing to take a high risk for a chance at a possible cure when told that surgery was the only option for a potential cure. While half of the patients would undergo surgery if it improved survival chances for greater than 2 years, about 20% would also undergo surgery for survival of only 3 to 12 months. And as I shared with you earlier in my story, I came to this point in my journey where quality of life became more important than the quantity. As my fellow patients agreed, while we would all like to increase our survival time, there comes a point when choosing quality of life is way more important than the quantity. An overwhelming over 80% of patients would seek a second opinion if told they were not eligible for surgery. Surgery is so valuable for us that another over 40% of patients would seek a third opinion if they told they were not eligible for surgery. Again, surgery is so valuable that 50% of patients would be willing to have surgery even if there was no chance for a cure, which emphasizes the importance of surgery when it comes to treatment options. We still want the cancer to be taken out even if it won't cure us. As I shared earlier, my cancer returned 3 months after my liver resection. I imagined it may already have spread before surgery, but we couldn't see it. And I'm glad we couldn't see it, or surgery may have been taken off the table for me. And I know that by having the resection, it bought me some time to find the clinical trial that ultimately got me here today. The majority of patients are willing to travel greater than 200 miles to have a surgery at a specific institution. And again, they are willing to travel greater than 200 miles to receive surgery from a specific surgeon. When it comes to non-surgical therapies such as chemotherapy, over 90% of patients viewed molecular profiling or biomarker testing as an important and necessary part of their treatment plan. Patients are aware of profiling through initiatives from advocacy organizations such as Know Your Tumor through PanCan and Biomarkers Matter from the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. And they are proactive about wanting their treatments to be personalized. So please get your patients profiled. And as I was willing, so are other patients to undergo treatments with severe side effects if it would extend their life. While the majority of patients would only endure severe side effects for 3 to 12 months, about 25% are willing to endure them for over 2 years. A significant amount of patients are willing to try treatment, even if there's no guarantee of it helping them, which most patients do when there's no proven treatment regimen. When it comes to financial debt, as I said earlier in my personal experience, I wasn't willing to put my family in financial debt, and about 40% of patients agreed with me. But I feel it's important to note that the other 60% disagreed with me and were willing to take on some form of financial debt, including bankruptcy. And again, as I was separated from my family for extended periods of time for both my TIL treatments, other patients are willing to be separated for their families as well. Again, myself included, being hospitalized twice for my cell treatments, patients are willing to be hospitalized in order to receive their treatments. Similar to the theme of our willingness to take risks, when it comes to our doctors, most patients want their doctor to take risks with their treatment plan. And when we choose not to undergo further treatment, we still want our symptoms managed and to be taken care of so we can have some sort of quality of life. If told that the chance of treatment working is so low it's not worth the risk, most patients feel that their doctor had their best interest at heart. On the other hand, almost 40% of patients felt that their doctor was giving up or was not a risk taker. And finally, moving on to clinical trials, which is a huge part of our treatment plan, especially since there's no proven treatment regimen for these cancers. An overwhelming 95% of the patients who took this survey are open to trying experimental therapies. And an over 80% are willing to participate in clinical trials. We just need the opportunity to enroll and have the access to participate. And as I was willing to enter into a trial where there was no proven success, so were 60% of my fellow patients. As patients, we all feel the hope that we could be the first person to have a response. As in my case, I was. Someone has to be the first. When I was left with no further options for treatment, I entered with the feeling that I had absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. 85% of patients would enter into a trial that has high risk for the chance of better outcomes. Again, the hope for a potential better outcome is worth the risk when you have been told there's no proven treatment regimen. 60% of patients would enter into a phase 1 clinical trial. and over 90% would be willing to participate in a phase 2 trial of a new drug being tested either alone or in combination of standard of care. And equally important, 70% would enter into a randomized phase 3 trial of standard of care versus experimental drug. But when it comes to placebos in the clinical trial setting, most patients would only enter into a trial with a placebo if there was an option to cross over after 6 weeks. Otherwise, they would not choose a placebo trial at all. In conclusion, when it comes to social support, I want to emphasize the patient's decision-making is somewhat influenced by their social support system, but ultimately, patients are making their own decisions. When making decisions on surgical and non-surgical treatments, we're willing to take significant risks in order to receive a chance at a better outcome. And in the clinical trial setting, patients are hesitant to receive a placebo unless crossover is an option, but we are most definitely willing to enroll in clinical trials. I want to thank you for the time I was given today, and thank you to all the patients who took the survey and for all who made this presentation possible. Almost 11 years ago, when I was diagnosed, I begged God for 5 years to see my children grow. And I'm happy to say that as of almost 2 years ago, I was blessed to be here long enough to become a grandma for the first time. I'm also grateful even in tragedy. This past January, I lost my 24-year-old son unexpectedly. But the good news was we were able to donate his organs, and he was able to save several lives. He was able to donate his liver to another cholangiocarcinoma patient and extend her life, and I know he would be so proud of himself for the accomplishments he made. I'm thankful for the doctors, the surgeons, and the researchers who were willing to take the risks to get me here. And I want to leave you with this slide of my fellow warriors who have passed away. It's these faces that keep me going every day, keep me motivated to make me work harder for cancer patients, to help them navigate the cancer, have access to clinical trials, and provide better options to them. Thank you so much for your time.